All right, let's dive right in. What we're talking about today isn't some wild financial guess. Nope, we're looking at a mathematical certainty, a specific date on the calendar that really is a point of no return. So, let's get to it.
So, here's the date you need to have circled on your calendar, February 2nd, 2026. This is the moment when all the theory, all the warnings we've heard for decades, it all becomes very, very real. It's the end of one cycle, and honestly, the start of a much tougher new reality. And this is the number that sets everything in motion. $2 trillion. That's the projection for the annual interest payment on the US national debt. Just think about that for a second. That's more money than the entire economy of most countries on this planet. And it's not being spent on new roads or healthcare or anything productive. It's just the cost of paying the interest on old debt. Look, this isn't about politics. It's not left or right. It's just math. Cold, hard arithmetic. And it forces us to ask the one question that really matters. When the system itself starts to buckle, what's the exit strategy? How do you actually get through it? To really get a handle on what's coming, we've actually got to rewind the clock. We need to look at a pretty brutal lesson that one of the world's top investors learned the hard way, almost 4 decades ago. Okay, so picture this. It's 1982. Ray Dalio is absolutely convinced the economy is about to implode. And he doesn't just think it, he bets everything on it. On paper, logically, he was 100% correct. But he missed one crucial detail. He didn't account for the Fed. They just fired up the printing presses to save the whole system. The market shot up, and Dalio, he was completely wiped out. Had to borrow money from his dad. The lesson he learned, the one that's so important for today, wasn't about bad timing. It was that the system is programmed to do one thing. It will always sacrifice the value of your money to save itself and the biggest debtors. And that lesson leads us directly to the choice the government has to make when that $2 trillion interest payment comes due. It's a binary choice, really. Option A, an explicit default. Just say, sorry, we can't pay. That's unthinkable. It would literally crash the entire global order in a day. So, that leaves option B, print the difference. Just create the money out of thin air to pay the bills. The catch? That money is worth less. This is so important. Inflation stops being an unfortunate side effect. It becomes the policy. It's the only tool they have left in the box. And here's what that means for you, for anyone holding cash or bonds. Your savings, your hard-earned money, it becomes the fuel. It's literally the fuel that's shoveled into the furnace to burn away the system's massive debts. The value of your dollars is intentionally vaporized to make the government's liabilities manageable. So the obvious question is, how on earth do you protect yourself from that? Well, the first strategy we're going to look at is a direct answer to this threat. It's a concept called asset independence. Think of asset independence as your financial shield. If the government's promises, your cash, your bonds are the fuel for the fire, then you need to get your wealth into assets that are fireproof. We're talking about things like gold and Bitcoin, assets that exist completely outside the traditional system. Their value isn't based on someone else's promise to pay you back. But what if that shield isn't enough? Some people argue that just protecting your assets is a dangerously incomplete strategy. And that brings us to position number 2, which is much more, let's call it, offensive. This is called strategic sovereignty, and the core idea here is that protecting your portfolio is kind of pointless if the country you're living in is falling apart. So this isn't about decoupling your bank account. It's about decoupling you, the individual. It's about having geographic options and owning real essential assets, things like land and energy infrastructure, the stuff you actually need to live. And here's why that physical decoupling becomes so critical. A government that's financially desperate doesn't just stop at printing money. No way. The playbook is predictable. They start changing the rules. They enact capital controls to stop money from leaving. They slap on confiscatory taxes. They can even seize private assets. They'll do whatever it takes to survive. This really lays out the 2 different mindsets perfectly. You've got asset independence on one side. The goal is just to preserve your purchasing power. You do that by moving capital out of the system into things like gold and Bitcoin. It's a defensive move, a shield. Then you have strategic sovereignty. Here the goal is much bigger. Preserve your freedom and your wealth. The action isn't just moving your money. It's moving yourself out of the jurisdiction. The assets are real and physical. Passports, land, energy. This isn't a shield, it's a sword. It's an offensive strategy. One is about protecting your portfolio.
The other is about protecting your life. What this all means is that the old rules of investing, the ones that have worked pretty well for the last 40 years, they're not just bent anymore. They're completely broken. You've probably heard this quote, and it's never been more relevant. Trying to diversify now is like diversifying which stateroom of the Titanic you are sleeping in. For decades, the standard advice was simple: own a mix of stocks and bonds. But that advice assumes the ship is sound. What happens when the ship itself, the currency, the entire financial system, is the thing going down? Well, then rearranging the deck chairs doesn't help much, does it? And here's the technical reason why. In a crisis like this, where the currency itself is the problem, all the old correlations go haywire. They all approach one. That just means everything priced in that currency, stocks, bonds, real estate, it all starts moving down together. The whole idea of diversification, where one thing goes up when another goes down, it just falls apart. So the smart pivot, the new strategy, is to stop thinking about diversification inside the system and start thinking about concentration outside of it. Step 1 is to get rid of paper promises, your bonds, your cash. Step 2 is to concentrate your capital into assets that have absolute, undeniable scarcity. And step 3, you need to own what are called final settlement layers, things like physical gold or Bitcoin, assets that don't have counterparty risk. Their value isn't dependent on someone else staying solvent.
When you boil it all down, this whole event isn't really about the destruction of wealth. It's actually about the transfer of wealth, and probably on a scale that none of us have ever seen in our lifetimes.
This is one of those iron laws of history. Wealth is never really destroyed. It just moves. It gets transferred. And in a massive debt crisis, the direction of that transfer is always the same. It flows from the creditors, that's the savers, people holding cash and bonds, to the debtors. And the biggest debtor of all, of course, is the government. And hey, if you don't believe me, just watch what the smartest, wealthiest people in the world are doing right now. They aren't debating this stuff on Twitter. They're executing the strategic sovereignty playbook. They are buying up productive farmland. They are getting second passports. They're investing in private energy grids. This isn't theory for them. It's action. So that really brings it all home with a very direct, very personal question for you to consider. We know this massive wealth transfer is coming. It's unavoidable. It's going to move from savers to debtors, from those who are dependent on the system to those who are sovereign from it. The only question left is, which side of that transfer are you going to be on? You know, the time for just thinking about this, for debating the theory, that time is over. We are now officially in the execution phase. The pieces are moving on the board as we speak, and the decisions you make right now are what will separate the winners from the losers over the next decade. And that really leaves us with one final, kind of chilling thought. The next move is already prepared. The plans have been made. The powerful players are already making their moves. The only question that remains is, are you prepared to make yours?